My parents had access to my son's disability settlement account. $52,000 from his accident 3 years ago. They spent it all on a boat for themselves. They said he'll never know. He's too young to understand money. When my lawyer ran the account audit, he didn't panic. He smiled and said every transaction is documented. My parents' faces went pale. They both stood in silence. The conference room had white walls and a view of the parking lot. My parents sat across from me at a long table. My mother's hands were folded on the surface. My father kept shifting in his chair. Patricia Reyes, my attorney, sat beside me with a manila folder closed in front of her. She hadn't opened it yet. My son was at school. He didn't know about this meeting. He didn't know about any of it. Let me tell you how we got here. My parents always treated me like I needed guidance. From the time I was in high school, they positioned themselves as the people who knew better. My mother would tell me what jobs to apply for. My father would explain how money worked. When I got pregnant at 23, unmarried, they told me I'd made my life harder than it needed to be. They said it with concern in their voices, like they were trying to help. When my son Ethan was born, they stepped in. They babysat. They gave advice. They told me which daycare to use and which pediatrician was too expensive. I was working as a sales associate at a furniture store making $28,000 a year. They reminded me often that I was lucky to have their support. My mother said it at least once a month. You're lucky we're here. 3 years ago, Ethan was hit by a car in a grocery store parking lot. The driver was texting. Ethan spent 2 weeks in the hospital with a fractured pelvis and internal injuries. He was 8 years old. The driver's insurance company settled immediately. $52,000 placed in a custodial account for Ethan's future. Medical expenses, education, whatever he needed when he was older. My parents offered to be co-signers on the account. They said I was too emotional to manage it properly. They said I might spend it on something impulsive. I was still working at the furniture store. I didn't argue. I signed the paperwork that made them co-custodians. For months after the settlement, my mother mentioned they'd bought a boat. A 23-foot Sea Ray. She said my father had always wanted one. She said they got a good deal. She didn't say how they paid for it. I started noticing small things. My parents took a trip to Lake Tahoe. They upgraded their television. My father bought new fishing equipment. My mother talked about the boat constantly. How much fun they were having. How they'd take Ethan out on it when he was older. I asked to see the account statement. My mother said she'd bring it next time she visited. She never did. I asked again 2 months later. My father said they'd misplaced the recent one, but everything was fine. The money was safe. I worked at the furniture store for another year. Then I got a job at a telecommunications company doing inside sales. $37,000 a year. My parents said it was good that I was finally taking things seriously. My mother told me to make sure I stayed on good terms with my manager. She said people like me couldn't afford to burn bridges. I didn't tell them I'd been promoted to senior sales associate within 6 months. I didn't tell them my commission structure had changed. I closed a contract worth $84,000 in revenue my first quarter in the new role. My mother called that same week to tell me I should look into getting a certificate in bookkeeping. Something stable. I said I'd think about it. I signed another contract the next morning. By the time Ethan turned 10, I'd moved to enterprise sales. I was managing accounts worth 6 figures annually. My base salary was $72,000 with commission putting me over $110,000. My parents still thought I was making $37,000. My mother still gave me advice about saving money. My father still explained investment strategies to me like I was learning them for the first time. I asked about the settlement account again. I said Ethan would be starting middle school soon, and I wanted to review the funds for any educational expenses. My mother said the money was untouched. She said they were being very careful with it. She said I should trust them. I called the bank directly. I said I was the primary guardian and needed account access. They told me I'd need to come in with the co-custodians to make any changes. I said I just wanted to see the balance. They said they couldn't give me that information without all parties present. I opened my laptop that night and sent an email to Patricia Reyes. I'd worked with her on a contract dispute at my company. She'd mentioned she also handled family law. I asked if we could meet. 2 weeks later, I sat in her office and explained the situation. She asked if I had any documentation showing the original settlement amount. I had the court order. She asked if I had any proof my parents were co-custodians. I had the bank signature card. She asked if I noticed any unusual purchases. I told her about the boat. Patricia didn't react visibly. She took notes. She said we could request a full audit of the account. She said if funds had been misappropriated, there were legal remedies. She said it might get uncomfortable. I told her to file everything. The audit took 6 weeks. During that time, I saw my parents every Sunday for dinner. My mother asked about work. I said it was fine. My father asked if I was still at the telecom company. I said yes. My mother said she'd heard they were doing layoffs. I said I hadn't heard that. My mother talked about planning a lake trip for Ethan's next birthday. She said he'd love being out on the water. My father nodded and said they'd teach him to fish. I smiled and said that sounded nice. I had Patricia's preliminary findings in my car. The account balance was $1,100. The audit came back complete on a Thursday. Patricia called me at work. She said we needed to meet in person. I left early and drove to her office. She had the full report on her desk. 50 pages of transactions. Every withdrawal documented with dates and amounts. The boat purchase was listed. $22,000. There were withdrawals for a trailer. Withdrawals for maintenance. Withdrawals for fuel and docking fees. There were withdrawals for furniture. For appliances. For a trip to Arizona. For another trip to Nevada. The account had been drained systematically over 30 months. Patricia showed me a summary page. Total withdrawals, $50,900. Remaining balance, $1,100. Every transaction required 2 signatures. My parents had signed everything together. I asked what the legal options were. Patricia said this was textbook misappropriation of funds held in trust for a minor. She said we could file criminal charges. She said we could file a civil suit for recovery of funds plus damages. She said the documentation was airtight. Every transaction had been flagged by the bank's internal system, but never reported because my parents were listed co-custodians. I asked how long it would take. She said if we moved quickly, we could have a settlement conference within 45 days. She said if my parents had assets, recovery was possible. She said their homestead might be protected, but the boat wasn't. Neither were any other purchases made with the funds. I told her to file everything. I told her to request the earliest possible conference date. She asked if I wanted to give my parents a chance to make this right privately first. I said no. The paperwork was filed on a Monday. My parents were served on Wednesday. My mother called me 17 times that day. I didn't answer. My father left a voicemail. He said we needed to talk. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said they'd put the money back. I called Patricia. I asked if them returning the money changed anything. She said it didn't erase the crime. She said it might affect sentencing if we pursued criminal charges, but the civil case would proceed regardless. I told her I wanted everything. Full recovery, legal fees, and damages for the emotional harm to Ethan. The settlement conference was scheduled for 62 days out. During that time, my parents called constantly. I blocked their numbers. They showed up at my house twice. I didn't answer the door. My mother sent a letter. She said they'd made a mistake. She said they thought they were allowed to use some of the money since they were managing it. She said they'd sell the boat and give back everything. Patricia advised me not to respond. She said any communication should go through her. She said my parents were trying to manipulate me into dropping the case. She said the evidence was so strong that their only strategy was to appeal to my emotions. I went to work every day. I closed contracts. I took Ethan to school and picked him up and made dinner and helped with homework. He asked once why Grandma and Grandpa hadn't visited. I said they were busy. He said okay and went back to his math worksheet. At work, my manager asked me to present at the National Sales Conference. I'd brought in over $600,000 in revenue that year. I was the top performer in our region. She wanted me to share my strategy with the other enterprise reps. I said yes. The conference was in Chicago. The settlement conference was the week before. My mother sent another letter. This one was longer. She said I was being cruel. She said they were my parents and they'd sacrificed everything for me. She said I was ungrateful. She said Ethan would be ashamed of me when he found out what I was doing to his grandparents. She said the money had been just sitting there and they'd needed help with expenses. She said they'd always planned to pay it back. I put the letter in a folder with all the others. I didn't respond. Patricia said that was the right move. The day before the settlement conference, I picked out my clothes. A navy suit I'd bought after my last promotion. Professional, but not flashy. I wanted to look like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. I dropped Ethan at school and told him I had a work meeting. He asked if I'd be there for pickup. I said yes. The conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I arrived at 9:30. Patricia met me in the lobby of the office building. She was carrying 2 briefcases. She said my parents' attorney had called that morning asking if we'd consider a payment plan. She'd said no. Full recovery or we proceed to court. We took the elevator to the 14th floor. The conference room had windows overlooking the city. My parents were already there with their attorney, a man in his 50s named Douglas something. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. My father's face was red. They both stared at me as I walked in. Patricia and I sat on one side of the table. My parents and Douglas sat on the other. A mediator, a woman named Karen, sat at the head. She explained the process. Each side would present their position. We'd discuss possible resolutions. The goal was to avoid court if possible. Douglas spoke first. He said my parents deeply regretted their actions. He said they'd been under financial stress and made poor decisions. He said they were willing to return the full amount over a period of 5 years. He said they'd already listed the boat for sale. He said they were prepared to offer a formal apology. Patricia didn't let me respond. She opened her first briefcase and pulled out the audit report. She slid it across the table. She said this wasn't about an apology. She said this was about $50,900 stolen from a disabled child. She said the transactions showed clear intent. She said my parents hadn't just made poor decisions, they'd systematically drained an account they were legally obligated to protect. My mother's voice came out thin. She said they'd never thought of it as stealing. She said they were family. She said they'd planned to replace it. Patricia pulled out another document. Bank statements showing my parents' finances. She'd subpoenaed them as part of discovery. She pointed to their mortgage balance, their credit card debt, their car payments. She said they didn't have the means to pay back $50,000 over 5 years. She said the math didn't work. My father said they'd figure it out. He said they'd get second jobs. He said they'd do whatever it took. I spoke for the first time. I asked if they'd thought about doing whatever it took before they bought the boat. I asked if they'd considered getting second jobs before they took a trip to Arizona. I asked if they'd planned to replace the money before or after they spent $11,000 on new living room furniture. My mother started to cry. She said I was being heartless. She said they were my parents. She said family was supposed to forgive. Patricia pulled out a third document. An itemized list of every purchase made with Ethan's money. The boat. The trailer. The furniture. The appliances. A new television. A sound system. 3 trips. Jewelry. A watch. Landscaping. New windows. Everything listed with the date and amount. She slid it across the table. She said this wasn't a mistake. She said this was theft executed over 30 months with full knowledge and intent. She said my parents had signed off on every single withdrawal knowing exactly what they were doing. Douglas asked for a 5-minute recess. Karen agreed. My parents stood and left the room with him. Patricia and I stayed seated. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She said I was doing well. She said we had them. When my parents came back, my mother's eyes were red. My father wouldn't look at me. Douglas sat down and said they were prepared to offer full restitution paid over 3 years. He said they'd liquidate the boat and any other assets purchased with the funds. He said they'd sign a promissory note with interest. Patricia said 3 years wasn't acceptable. She said we wanted full payment within 90 days. She said if they couldn't manage that, we'd proceed to court and let a judge decide. My mother's voice broke. She said they couldn't do that. She said they didn't have that kind of money. She said we'd be destroying them. I said they'd destroyed Ethan's future. I said that money was supposed to be for his education, his medical needs, his opportunities. I said they'd spent it on themselves without a second thought. My father finally spoke. He said I'd turned out fine without money. He said I had a good job. He said Ethan would be fine too. I paused. I let his words sit in the room. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were my last 3 pay stubs. My commission statements. My promotion letter from 8 months ago naming me Director of Enterprise Sales. My offer letter showing my base salary of $118,000 plus uncapped commission. I slid them across the table. I said I'd turned out fine despite them, not because of them. I said while they were giving me advice about bookkeeping certificates, I'd been closing deals worth more than they made in a year. I said while they were explaining how money worked, I'd been building a career they couldn't comprehend. My mother picked up the pay stub. Her hand was shaking. She looked at the number. She looked at me. She said she didn't understand. I said I knew she didn't. I said they'd never understood me. They'd never believed I was capable of anything more than what they'd decided I could do. I said they'd underestimated me my entire life, and even now, sitting in this room, they still thought they knew better. Patricia pulled out another document. A financial analysis she'd commissioned. It showed my assets, my savings, my investment accounts, my net worth. She said I didn't need their help. I never had. She said what I needed was justice for my son. My father said this wasn't about justice. He said this was about me being vindictive. He said I was punishing them for trying to help over the years. I asked how stealing from my son was helping. I asked how lying about it for 30 months was helping. I asked how spending his money on a boat they'd use twice a month was helping. He didn't answer. Douglas said they'd go to 90 days if we waived the damages claim. Patricia said no. She said we wanted full restitution, legal fees, and $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and breach of fiduciary duty. My mother said they didn't have $100,000. She said we were asking for something impossible. She said I was being unreasonable. Patricia said they'd had $52,000. They'd chosen to spend it. She said the consequences of that choice weren't her problem. She said they could liquidate assets, borrow money, or face a court judgment that would attach to everything they owned, including their house. The room went quiet. Karen, the mediator, asked if we'd consider a middle position. Patricia said we'd already stated our position. She said my parents could accept it or reject it, but we weren't negotiating down. Douglas asked for another recess. Karen said we'd take 15 minutes. My parents left again. This time my mother was sobbing in the hallway. I could hear her through the door. My father's voice was low and angry. I couldn't make out the words. Patricia asked if I wanted coffee. I said no. She asked if I wanted to step out. I said I was fine right here. She nodded and pulled out her phone to check messages. When they came back, my mother's face was blotchy. My father looked defeated. Douglas said they'd accept the terms under one condition. They wanted the payment structure to be 60 days for the $52,000 restitution, then monthly payments over 12 months for the legal fees and damages. Patricia looked at me. I looked at my parents. My mother was staring at the table. My father was staring at his hands. I thought about Ethan asking why they hadn't visited. I thought about him saying okay when I told him they were busy. I thought about how easy it would be for him to never know what they'd done. How simple it would be to tell him they'd just drifted apart. I said no. I said I wanted full payment in 90 days or we go to court. I said if they couldn't manage that, they'd have to explain to a judge why they thought my son's disability settlement was their personal fund. My mother looked up. She said I was heartless. She said I'd changed. She said the daughter she'd raised would never do this. I said the daughter they'd raised didn't exist. I said they'd never actually known me. They'd known the version of me they'd created in their heads. The one who needed their guidance. The one who'd always struggle. The one who'd always be grateful for their help. I said that person was never real. Douglas said they'd need to discuss with their financial advisor. Karen said we could reconvene in 1 week. Patricia said that was fine. She started packing her briefcases. My father said we were making a mistake. He said family didn't do this to each other. He said we'd regret this. I stood up. I said I'd regretted trusting them with my son's future. I said I'd regretted every Sunday dinner where they'd given me advice they had no business giving. I said I'd regretted not seeing them clearly years ago. I said this was me correcting my mistakes. We left the conference room. In the elevator, Patricia said they'd settle. She said they didn't have a choice. She said Douglas knew they'd lose in court and the judgment would be worse. I asked how much worse. She said the judge could award triple damages. She said they were getting off easy with my offer. The elevator doors opened. We walked through the lobby and out to the parking lot. Patricia said she'd call me when she heard from Douglas. I thanked her and got in my car. I sat there for 5 minutes before I started the engine. My hands had stopped shaking. I realized I'd been holding tension in my shoulders for the entire meeting. I rolled them back and took a breath. I drove to Ethan's school and got there 20 minutes before dismissal. I sat in the pickup line and checked my work email. My manager had sent the agenda for the Chicago conference. My session was scheduled for the second day. I was presenting for 90 minutes on enterprise sales strategy. The session description called me one of the top performers in the company. Ethan got in the car and threw his backpack in the back seat. He asked if my work meeting went okay. I said it went fine. He asked what it was about. I said just some financial stuff. He said that sounded boring. I said it kind of was. He asked if we could get pizza for dinner. I said yes. Douglas called Patricia 3 days later. They'd accept the terms. Full payment in 90 days. They'd liquidate the boat, take a loan against their house, and borrow from my father's retirement account. Patricia drafted the settlement agreement. Both parties signed it on a Friday afternoon. The first payment arrived in 32 days. $22,000 from the boat sale. The second payment arrived in 60 days. $18,000 from the home equity loan. The final payment arrived in 87 days. $12,000 from my father's 401k withdrawal. The full amount was deposited into a new custodial account with only my name on it. Ethan's money. Protected this time. I didn't hear from my parents for 8 months. Then my mother sent a card on Ethan's birthday. Inside was a gift card for $25 and a note saying they missed him. I put the card in a drawer and didn't mention it to Ethan. He had a party with his friends and didn't ask about my parents once. My father called me 6 months after that. He said my mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer. He said they couldn't afford treatment. He said their insurance had high deductibles. He said he was asking if I could help. I told him I was sorry to hear about my mother's diagnosis. I told him I hoped they found a way to manage it. I told him I had to go. He said I was cold. I said maybe. I hung up. Patricia called me 2 weeks later. She said my parents had tried to file a motion to reduce the settlement terms claiming financial hardship. She said the judge had denied it within 48 hours. She said the order cited their voluntary asset liquidation and loan obligations as consequences of their own actions. She said the judge had noted that they'd failed to demonstrate any change in circumstances that would warrant modification. I'm a senior director now. I manage a team of 8 enterprise sales reps. My base salary is $147,000. Last year, I cleared $223,000 with commission. Ethan is 14. He wants to go to college for engineering. His settlement account has grown to $68,000 with interest and additional contributions I've made. He knows about the money. I told him last year. I explained what had happened. I explained what his grandparents had done. He asked if that's why we didn't see them anymore. I said yes. He said okay and asked if we could still afford college. I said yes. He said that was good and went back to his room. My mother's cancer went into remission. I know this because my aunt told me at a family funeral I attended last year. My mother was there. We didn't speak. She looked older, smaller. My father looked the same. They left before the reception ended. My aunt asked if we'd ever reconcile. I said I didn't think so. She said that was sad. I said maybe. I said I wasn't sad about it. Ethan asked me last month if he had to invite them to his high school graduation. I said no. I said it was his day, and he could invite whoever he wanted. He said he didn't want them there. He said he didn't really know them anyway. He said it felt weird to have people there who'd stolen from him. I said I understood. He said thanks and asked if we could go look at colleges over spring break. I said absolutely. I don't regret what I did. I don't regret the settlement conference or the legal fees or the fact that my parents had to borrow against their future to pay back what they'd stolen. I don't regret cutting them out of our lives. I don't regret telling Ethan the truth. Some people think family means unlimited chances. Some people think forgiveness means accepting harm. I think family means protecting the people who depend on you. I think forgiveness means you don't wish them harm, but you don't let them close enough to harm you again. My parents thought I'd never be more than what they'd decided I could be. They thought Ethan would never know what they'd done. They thought the money was just sitting there unused. They were wrong about everything. They underestimated me. They underestimated what I'd built. They underestimated what I was willing to do to protect my son. That was their mistake. I see my son thriving now. I see him planning his future with confidence. I see him understanding that actions have consequences and that stealing is wrong even when family does it. I see him knowing his mother protected what was his. That's worth more than any relationship with people who'd take from a child and call it helping. So, did I go too far? Or not far enough? Tell me in the comments.